My name is Hugo Ortega, and I'm going to talk about photosynthesis, the definition and the steps and the processes that occur in the photosynthesis. We're going to talk about photosynthesis. The photosynthesis comes from the words photos, which means light, and synthesis, which is the union or the combination of or the creation from something, which here is from light, you convert it into energy or chemical energy. Photosynthesis is a process by which autotrophs, which are plants or plant-like kingdoms, convert light energy into chemical energy, which is later used to fuel cellular activities such as respiration, or in the case of plants, just like sustaining life or reproducing. And the chemical energy stored in the form of sugars or in glucose in this case, which are created from water and carbon dioxide. So with the carbon dioxide, the water, and the solar energy, which is light, we create the glucose and the oxygen from these. So for photosynthesis, we have two big steps or two big processes in which different things happen. In the first part of the process is the light-dependent reactions, which is where sunlight is transformed into chemical energy, or it is just obtained, and from ATP and NADPH. So these are like contrary solutions that they use to create energy. And chloroplasts absorb the energetic wavelengths of photons. And then we have the independent light reactions. NADPH and ATP are dissolved in the stroma surrounding the ticaloids, and these molecules provide energy to synthesize glucose from carbon and water. Then the Calvin cycle happens, which is like in the image we have in the middle of the part of the presentation. So here we have first you enter water, and then we have 6 AUBP molecules combined with CO2. Then the ATP turns into ADP, and NADPH turns into NADP with a positive charge. And then these 5 G3P molecules, which are like a half of a glucose molecule, are used to create 2PI or P, and the molecule 1 G3P molecule is stored, which is used for the energy later on, and ADP turns into ATP, which is what happened in the beginning. It just reverses it so that it can be reused for another color.
Okay, so there are a lot of elements that are needed to complete the photosynthesis process, and some elements have a lot of tasks, but others have little tasks but are still important. For example, the enzymes. Well, the enzymes have a big role in the photosynthesis. They are organic catalysts. For example, they separate the water into hydrogen and oxygen that is needed to complete the photosynthesis process. And another task, for example, is the synthesization of ATP molecules. These molecules are synthesized by the enzyme ATP synthase. Okay, so we have other elements, for example, proteins. Well, proteins are very important in the photosynthesis process. They are responsible for the transportation of many elements and pigments, for example, iron, electrons, and other stuff. And these are carried out by electrons, and pigments, that are some of the things that are transported within proteins, are a lot of need in the photosynthesis process. So they are still very important, even if they are little compounds. Okay, so to carry out the photosynthesis process, we need energy, and this energy comes with the ATP molecules. Well, the ATP molecules are required, obviously, but how many? We need actually 18 ATP molecules and 12 NADPH molecules to transform 6 molecules of CO2 into glucose that is later needed to transform other processes.
Hi, I'm Debanhi Monsivais, and now we're going to see the cellular respiration. It's the process by which heterotrophic organisms obtain chemical energy from organic compounds through the glucose and respiration. And now we're going to explain the steps for the process, the key names for the proteins and the enzymes used, and the amount of ATP produced. Well, now we have the formula for cellular respiration. We know that our body has glucose and oxygen, these are the reactants, and that give us the products that are carbon dioxide, water, and energy as the ATP. And all these three products are in the actions that we complete every day. Well, now we conclude that the amount of ATP is 38 ATP molecules. Now, for oxidation and reduction, the cellular respiration involves different reactions, and for a redox reaction, the electrons are transferred between two molecules, so one loses electrons and one gains. We have also the electron carriers that are the ones who link the oxidation and reduction within cells, and two of the most important are NAD and FAD. This is a process for the oxidation and reduction. As the first part, we have the electron carrier and we have NAD. We have then oxidized form and it results NAD with a positive charge. The electron exchange is with two electrons, and the result as the reduced form is NADH plus H positive. Then we have FAD. In its oxidized form, it remains the same, it's neutral, and in the electron exchange is the same as NAD with two electrons. Then in the reduced form, we have FADH2.
Hi, my name is Hugo González, and today I'm going to continue explaining the process of the cellular respiration. So first, it is divided into three steps. The first one is called glycolysis. The first one produces a total amount of 2 ATP energy molecules. The second one is called Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle produces a total amount of 2 ATP molecules of energy. And the third one called chemiosmosis. And this third one produces a total amount of 34 ATP molecules. So we have some different enzymes and proteins that they are used along this process. The first one is a pyruvate, then the coenzyme FADH2, and the NADH and the FADH2 transfer electrons. So then ATP is created from phosphate and adenosine diphosphate, each one of them with their respective uses. Okay, so for this first process called glycolysis, that orange hexagon called glucose is converted through a different series of complex steps into pyruvate, that green rectangle that is over there, where 2 net ATP and 2 NADH molecules are generated in the process, with a total amount of 2 ATP molecules of energy created after all of this whole process. Now, for this second process called Krebs cycle, the pyruvate that we already created in the last step called glycolysis, it gets oxidized, producing 2 FADH2 molecules, along with 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 2 ATP molecules that is the energy that is created in this step, 6 molecules of NADH, and finally acetyl-CoA, that are the 2 molecules of NADH from the pyruvate conversion before the Krebs cycle. Finally, for this third and last process called chemiosmosis, also known as electron transport chain, 2 molecules of NADH and the FADH2 transfer electrons to create the water, where simultaneously the phosphate and the adenosine diphosphate are synthesized and create the ATP molecules, where exactly we produce 34 molecules to finalize with this cellular transpiration process.
Hi, my name is Dayana Correa, and now my friend Eduardo and I, we are going to explain the fermentation process that consists the steps of this fermentation, cue names for the enzymes and proteins used, and the amount of ATP products. Well, first I'm going to start with the key names for the enzymes and the proteins used. And the first one is glucose. Glucose is a sugar that provides in our body. The primary source is the energy. This type of sugar comes from digesting carbohydrates into a chemical that converts to energy. Well, this glucose, if we have a lot of glucose in our body, is bad for health because can cause diseases like diabetes. Like for example, if you consume a lot of fruits all the time, have a lot of sugar that convert into energy. So now we have the pyruvate, that is the end of product of the glycolysis. They have a chemical formula of C3, that is carbon, H, that is hydrogen 4, and O3, that is oxygen. So when it's converted into acetyl-CoA is because enters the Krebs cycle when there is sufficient oxygen. But what happens if have insufficient oxygen? Well, the pyruvate is broken down anaerobically, creating lactate in animals, and this can include in humans too, and the ethanol in plants. The lactate is an organic compound that occurs naturally in the body of each person. There is a substance produced by the cells of the body that turns food into energy. That is the cell metabolism with the highest level of production occurring in the muscles, in our muscles. And depending of the pH, it sometimes presents in the form of lactic acid. Well, the lactate is because of when we do exercise, when we run, when we walk, and that is why lactic acid. So now we have the acetaldehyde, that is an organic chemical compound with the formula of C, that is carbon, C2, hydrogen 4, and oxygen. It's a clear liquid that burns easily and has a strong. For the other, in the high concentration, can make us breathing difficult. So it's known as ethanol that forms naturally in the body and in the plants. Well, finally, in these keywords we have the ethanol, that is also called LT alcohol or grain alcohol, whatever you want to call. This is because the ethanol is an alcohol obtained from the fermentation of sugars and starch or by a chemical synthesis. Have a chemical formula that is C carbon 2, H hydrogen 5, and OH, that means hydroxides. The H is hydrogen and the O is oxygen. So this is an intoxicating ingredient of alcohol beverage because it's used as a solvent in explosives and as an additive to replacement for the petroleum. So this is all for this step, for these keywords. And next, my friend Edu are going to explain the diagram with these keywords. So I hope you like and thank you so much for your attention.
Hi, my name is Eduardo Martinez and I'm going to be presenting the steps for the process of fermentation for both lactic and alcoholic fermentation. Lactic fermentation is the process by which our muscle cells deal with pyruvate during anaerobic respiration. When our cells need energy, they break down simple molecules like glucose. In the first step of lactic fermentation, which is the glycolysis, one glucose molecule is converted to two pyruvate molecules producing two neat ATP and two NADH. And in the second process of lactic fermentation, that is called NAD plus regeneration, it's transferred to NADH and the NAD transfers its electrons directly to pyruvate to reuse them, generating lactate as a byproduct. Alcoholic fermentation is a biochemical process in which sugars such as glucose, fructose, and sucrose are converted into small ATP amounts, generating by this process ethanol and carbon dioxide. And in the first step is always glycolysis in the fermentation part. It breaks down glucose into two pyruvate molecules, producing two net ATP and NADH. And in the second process, in the NAD plus regeneration, 2-NADH passes its electrons to acetyl, regenerating NAD plus and forming alcohol or ethanol. Both in lactic and alcoholic fermentation, the ATP amount produced is 2.
So after reading and researching about the photosynthesis, cellular respiration, and fermentation, we now have a better idea of how these processes works, because they are very complex and they have a lot of detail that need to be understood to have a better idea of how they work. For example, how the ATP is involved in the different processes and how the enzymes and proteins are involved in the synthesization of elements, or for example the different types of fermentations that are in these types of processes to have energy. And comparing these processes can help us get a better idea. For example, understanding the different types of fermentation or understanding the different elements. So in conclusion, we learn and got a better understanding of all these concepts and how they all work together.